Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I need to begin by making a clarification. There should not be any confusion. I am not turning 60. In this field, maturity is not a virtue. And everyone's wishing me a happiest 60th birthday. It made me very, very self-conscious. It got so bad that I went out and bought myself a little wig. So please, 3 weeks ago, we were in Fort Wayne, Indiana at a spring regional convention with 380 people. A few of you were there and will agree the only word to describe it is indescribable. It was really quite amazing. And everyone knows that NCSY is famous for its Havdalah. And Rabbi Lichtig, our chapter director, spoke at Havdalah. You have to understand this is not your dad's Havdalah. That takes about 2 minutes. Our Havdalah ended about 11:30 at night. And Rabbi Lichtig shared with us a great, great message and an amazing story. He said that in 1950, May 6, 1950 to be exact, the head of Beitar is the secular Zionist youth organization, the head of Beitar was raging with anger. The wounds of the Holocaust were still fresh, and he could not believe that the German team was invited to play in New York at a soccer game. So he fired up his Beitar boys, and they went to the game armed with tomatoes. And they pelted the German soccer team with tomatoes, and his dream came true. It was a huge success. He got his picture on the front pages of all the newspapers with his head in a headlock of an Italian cop, an NYPD officer, and he made it big, and the picture made it around the country. That newspaper landed on the desk of Rabbi Hutner, who was Rosh Hashiva of Chaim Berlin, and one of the people who was credited for rebuilding Torah after the Holocaust, educating the leaders and inspiring the leaders who rebuilt on these shores. And Reb Hutner saw this newspaper clipping on his desk, and he looked in that picture and he saw fire in the eyes, and he said, "Der junger Mann hat chutzpah, mir darfen haben." This young man, he's got gall. We need him. We need him on our team, so to speak. And they tracked him down, and they brought him to the yeshiva, and 4 years later, this young man, college kid, head of Beitar, founded NCSY, Rabbi Pinchas Stolper. And he ran around the country 3 weeks at a time. He didn't have a budget. He was traveling around mostly on Greyhound buses. And he was a visionary and a dreamer, a little bit crazy. Everyone told him it cannot be done. How could, in the 50s, make a youth group with co-ed with no dance on Saturday night? And they had a dance, but it was a different kind of dance. And people told him, and he was indefatigable. He was unstoppable. He was the person who had that chutzpah and that creativity and that vision and great sweat that he put into it. And all of us stand on his shoulders for these past 60 years. NCSY has changed the landscape. Speaking about a changing landscape, everyone has heard about the Jewish population study done by Pew, released 8 months ago, and 8 months everyone's digesting everything that's going on. You've heard the statistics, you know what's going on. Half the Jewish kids don't have a bar or bat mitzvah. And those that do, 3 years after their bar mitzvah or their bat mitzvah, 2/3 of them are nowhere to be seen in anything Jewish education and barely involved in anything socially in camp and anything. And the projections are that less than 25% of today's teens will marry Jewish. So it's horrific. The landscape is horrific. And that's why we who are concerned, we look at the landscape and we say, you know, a lot of things have been said about this Pew study, a lot of reviews and a lot of analysis and a lot of opinions, and I want to share a thought that I think is most important and very significant, and I haven't seen it anyplace else, but I believe you'll agree with me that this is very true. That of the 15 years ago, the people in the non-Orthodox movements who are suffering and hurting the most, they were in denial, titanic denial. They were oblivious. They did not see the red flags coming. All the things that we all know as facts today, they did not anticipate 15 years ago. They were feeling secure. They were feeling fine. They were feeling things were going well. And if there's one thing that we know from history, it's a cliche. Those who refuse to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. One of the things we learn from history is we don't learn from history. And for any of us to think that we are secure, that things are fine, and the way things have worked for the past decades will continue into the next decade, we too are in denial because the red flags are there. And us as individuals and people in the community must make adjustments and must do things differently and must make a difference. Otherwise, we will be doomed to repeat that history. And I hope and I pray that NCSY will play some kind of role in affecting that kind of change and changing the course of that history. And I thank each and every one of you for your generous support, your consistent support each year. And I thank Chayla Levitz, who is lost her mother this year in an Avelis. She chose not to be here. She was going to host it, but then once it was in her house, she chose not to be here. And thank her because she and Steve really, really changed the landscape of NCSY in Detroit. When they got involved, things really began to take off. And it's been 21 years. Actually, 1 year they did not host the barbecue. Some of you may remember there was Jack and Gail hosted it, and Steve and Bunny ended up in the swimming pool in their suits. I think that's the last time I saw my brother Bunny in a suit. And I want to thank the committee, Avi and Beth and Hershey and Debbie and Sherry and Noah, and the new generation, Mikey and Ariella, for all their great work in sustaining and making sure that NCSY is strong and does play that role in changing the landscape. There's another way in which NCSY changes the landscape. I saw Ruth Levy here and Noah, Ruth's daughter, Tova Weinberg, Noah's sister. I don't know if I saw Josh, but I know he's expected to be here. I saw Mrs. Josh, right? But Tova Weinberg is one of the founders of Saw You at Sinai, and they claim to be the largest shadchan in the Torah community, and I'd like to argue the verdict is not in yet. NCSY has a pretty strong position, and you may notice on your desk, on your chair, on the tables, there's a list of over 60 young men and women recently, in the recent years, who've met through NCSY. Just last week, I was in Columbus at the wedding of Danny and Valerie. They met in NCSY, became observant NCSY, met in NCSY. Their wedding was last Sunday. And a mazel tov to them, and a mazel tov to Ariella and Aaron Linkoff, Ricky and Buria's daughter, who got married this past Thursday in Miami. So there are a lot of beautiful, beautiful mazel tovs that happen in NCSY, and one of the other ways in which NCSY changes the landscape. So 3 weeks ago at our banquet, it's a 5-hour banquet. We keep this very, very short, but that's a 5-hour banquet. At the end of the evening, it was a full house. All the kids were still there, very excited. 4 chapters were convinced that they were going to win NCSY of the chapter of the year. Every chapter was competing. Some of the Detroiters wished they had tomatoes. They would have pelted me. They think we just discriminated against them, that they can't win 2 years in a row. But they are a great chapter, and there are 3 other great chapters. It was just an amazing evening. And one of the highlights of the night is NCSY of the Year. NCSY of the Year is the pinnacle, the graduating seniors, the stars. The kids who lived and breathed NCSY were committed to the organization, are committed to their communities, are committed to chesed. They are learning Torah, they are growing. They are true role models in NCSY. And they're called NCSYers of the Year, and there's supposed to be 3 and 4. We couldn't stop. We had 8, and our president is still angry. He thinks there was 2 more that should have been included. It was really, it's very inspiring. It's inspiring to the kids because one of the things that we said at the end of the evening was there was one common denominator between all those 8 kids. One common denominator. No one could have predicted 3 years ago that any of them would be on a pedestal, a role model, an NCSY of the Year. They were all transformations that happened in front of our eyes. That was the common denominator. And I was able to say that, and nobody contested. Everyone knew that. These are really great, great stars, and it was an inspiration to us, and it should be an inspiration to you. That NCSY continues year after year. And I want to introduce you to 2 of those NCSY of the Years. One is the recipient of the Meyer and Betsy Eisenberg Memorial Scholarship. He's a young man who came to the convention. He brought 100% of the Jewish population in his school. His 2 siblings and his friend. He goes to school in Windsor, Canada, and he is one of 4 Jews in the entire school. And he's an incredible, incredible role model and a star. He is on his school football team. He is his school president, and he is elected. He wears a yarmulke to school, wears a kippah to school every day, and it's a very Arab school, and he was elected by his classmates to be the valedictorian, and he cannot be here tonight to accept the scholarship because he has to attend a meeting. He is one of 2 students who are members of the Board of Education in the province of Ontario. He's one of 2 students who were chosen to serve, and tonight he is making a presentation and could not be there tonight. It could not be here tonight, and he is the recipient of this great, great scholarship in memory of the Eisenbergs. So that's one less picture that you have to take. And the next NCSY, his name is Noah Horowitz. Thank you. A very, very good friend of the Browns, and we really do have to thank the Browns, who are, this is not their style to be in the limelight, and they are part of the story of the great people who make NCSY work in our community. We very much appreciate them stepping to the plate. So Noah Horowitz is the recipient of the Eisenberg Scholarship. And representing the students of NCSY is our regional president. He's an outstanding young man. He is cursed with the body of a teenager and the soul and heart and mind of an adult. He's just a super, super mature and ambitious, incredible young man. And each year, the national office chooses one regional president to serve as its international president. And he never allowed me to say it from the microphone. So most of the kids at regional convention don't even know that he's the international head of international president of NCSY. But we have a don't ask, you can tell policy. So he never let me say it in NCSY, but I didn't ask, so I could say it here tonight. And the other thing he won't let me say is that he has been accepted to Gush. He's making faces at me. And to Columbia University. And it is a great honor to call upon our regional and international president of NCSY, Ami Nadev.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to take you back to 2 summers ago. I had flown into Israel a week early to visit family, so I ended up arriving at the NCSY Kollel hours before everyone else. This summer was going to be a very different one than my previous summer on NCSY's TJJ Ambassadors program, a program that focused on basic leadership development and Israel advocacy. It was primarily geared towards public school teens. I had the time of my life on that program. I made 40 new brothers and sisters. I connected with new mentors, and their selfless support and the mark they've made on me has enabled me to make leaps and bounds in my Judaism. This summer, however, was going to be more advanced, focused, challenging, and honestly, very overwhelming. I was going to have to play ball with the yeshiva boys, both literally and figuratively, both on the court and in the base. It was time for me to finally walk the walk of intense Torah study. So eventually I found somebody in the Kollel office, and they directed me to the bunk that I'd be staying at for the next 6 weeks. And after finding the best bed right underneath the air conditioner, unpacking, organizing, and reorganizing all of my stuff, my first roommate finally walks in. He throws the door open, steps inside, takes a good look at me, and proudly says, "Hey, I'm Peter." The first thing I noticed about Peter wasn't his fiery red hair or the abnormally large headphones that he was wearing. Instead, it was the wide, uncontrolled grin that could always be found on his face. Peter's one of those people who is just genuinely thrilled to be a part of this wonderful thing called life. The fascinating thing about Peter is that a year prior to going on NCSY Kollel, he hadn't the faintest clue what Shabbos was. And having only recently discovered the profound beauty that Judaism has to offer, Peter found joy in absolutely everything. And he taught those around him to experience that same joy for themselves. So Peter was roommate number 1. Roommate number 2 was Dove. I like to think of Dove as the reincarnation of your typical shtetl Jew. While Peter used to fall asleep listening to Bob Marley, Dove would fall asleep trying to learn Yiddish. Next, I had the pleasure of rooming with my third roommate, somebody very close to all of our hearts, a fellow Detroiter, Johnny Corman. Johnny brought a fun-loving and fierce loyalty, fun-loving spirit and a fierce loyalty to his friends, which ultimately made him the glue that united us as a group. My friends Johnny and Dove, who were raised in the religious world, are careful to do everything in their lives with a greater sense of awareness and purpose. They taught me about what it means to consistently live a life of focus and direction. And so lastly, there was me, roommate number 4, somewhat of a synthesis of my other 3 roommates. I want to tell you a brief story about me when I was only 6 years old. And I don't mean to embarrass my emo here, so I was 6 years old, and I was pleading and begging my mother to let us sleep out in the sukkah. After giving the reluctant emo to agree, I quickly and excitedly began to scour the house for warm blankets to form a makeshift bed outside in the sukkah. And while we were technically supposed to sleep in the sukkah, we spent nearly the entire night talking. And it was 2 a.m. when, despite the simplicity of my 6-year-old mind, I managed to articulate my defining love for Torah and Judaism. Now I'm embarrassing myself. I told my Ima that I wanted to spend my life making Hashem happy. I was watching a rather profound TED Talk the other day where the speaker discussed this idea that everybody has a closet that they're trying to get out of. I have to confess to all of you here today that after joining NCSY, I can officially say that I've come out of the closet. For you see, I used to be a closet Jew. I was a Jewish child who was ardently in love with Torah and Judaism, but I had no outlet to connect to express myself. My community was dilapidated, bruised, lacking. And my desire to live a religiously inspired life wasn't shared by too many of my classmates. And when I graduated Hillel and I entered high school at the Jewish Academy, I discovered that not much had changed. I had talented, engaging teachers that gave me an excellent education. I had kind-hearted, wonderful friends. They were loyal and incredible. But I was still unsuccessfully searching for a way to connect. People say, as Tzali mentioned, that the Jewish people are rapidly dissipating, rapidly fading into the chronicles of a time long past. According to the reports of the Pew study, 32% of all people with Jewish ancestors don't identify with any religion whatsoever. And in the last decade, 58% of all Jews who have gotten married have married non-Jewish spouses. People say that our future appears bleak, almost hopeless. Now, there's a reason why NCSY's symbol is a flame. A flame provides guidance from afar and warmth from up close. It even shares its beautiful gift without diminishing. NCSY is a place where every single teen, no matter their background, can experience an indiscriminatory sense of belonging, while relentlessly striving to become even greater versions of themselves. The success of NCSY is found in NCSYers' ability to learn from one another. Dove and Johnny, they give me a sense of direction and purpose. And Peter taught me to find the strength within myself to begin walking on a Jewish journey. And every step along the way, every step on my path these past 4 years, NCSY was there for me and my NCSY family, giving us the appropriate encouragement and support that we needed to grow and strive. People talk about the global decline of Judaism. In this, NCSY proudly remains an anomaly. There is a reason why nearly 100% of our alumni marry Jewish. At NCSY, people like Peter discover for the first time the beauty that their heritage has to offer. At NCSY, people like Dove and Johnny are instilled with a renewed sense of excitement and passion for Judaism. And at NCSY, people like me, they discover community. Every single NCSYer is filled with an exceptional and increasingly rare sense of pride. NCSY is what makes us forever proud to call ourselves a part of B'nai Yisrael. Lastly, I want to thank all of you for your support and the continued impact that you've had on me and my NCSY family. We are incredibly grateful. Thank you so much. Enjoy the barbecue.
And although Noah's not here, I just noticed that Mrs. Horowitz is here. So congratulations to the very, very rightfully proud mother of 5. Okay, one has not made it to NCSY yet, right? Right. Congratulations, and if you could. And I have a little bit of a surprise announcement for Ami. Ami's going to Israel in a couple months to study in yeshiva, and he very much wanted to be a junior madrich on the kollel, to go back to kollel as a junior madrich and to jumpstart his year in Israel. And Mr. Alan Fagan and Isabella Novak have filled in the missing money, so pack your bags, you're going to Israel in a couple weeks, 3 weeks. This donation is being made for the schus of the healthy and happy and speedy return of Gilad Michael ben Bat Galim, Yaakov Naftali ben Rachel Dvorah, and Ayal ben Iris Teshua. They should be returned to their families today. Amen. So, just have a few more minutes here. A little bit of history. 21 years ago, we approached Steve and Hershey to help make NCSY something very special and something great. And Hershey, his kids were not NCSY age. I don't think Ariella was even born then, 21 years ago, right? She wasn't around. And we asked, when our stock was down, we asked Hershey to adopt this as his cause, and he, together with his good friend, Steve Levitz, did, and the world is forever a better place because of that. And couldn't find a more fitting person to present to a childhood friend, to Dr. Larry and Dr. Helen Brown, a memorial award in memory of his other good friend, Steve Alvashal. Hershey Wrotslavky.
Tzali, thank you. I think you'd all agree it's a beautiful night for an outdoor barbecue. Okay? It's not a puzzle why Rachel, Tamar, and Esty are wonderful and sweet young women. They come from great roots. I know the Browns for 3 generations from the inside. Larry and I were classmates at the yeshiva. Larry's dad, who made many wise decisions in his life, once proudly told me, sending Larry to the yeshiva was the smartest move I made in life. Dolores, you should live and be well. You're like an aunt to me. And Hyatt, blessed memory, was a boss, a mentor, and just a super-duper friend. Together, Hy and Dolores transmitted a Masorah, a value system that is so strong it carries over 3 generations. As the rabbis say in Baba Metzia, a tradition that is transmitted for 3 generations is sure to be sustained forever. Larry and I were always close, except when I was acting like a Vildachaya. Because Larry was always walking the straight line. When Larry and Helen met, their lives became destined for a life of happiness. And I want to say, Baruch Hashem, it's nice to see Mrs. Ostro here today. Welcome. Together, they established a home that stands on strong values, discipline, and principles of Torah, community, chesed, hard work, and integrity. Each of our combined kids, 7 combined kids, 8 with Mikey. We've taken him over, Yossi. Okay. Have lived and breathed NCSY for a cumulative of about a couple decades. They've benefited and have been leaders of NCSY. We all know how central and important NCSY is to our families and to the whole community. Larry and Helen are very low-profile people, you know that. They don't relish this limelight, but it's because they appreciate the work of NCSY that they have agreed to accept this recognition. Steve Levitz was a very close friend of ours. He inspired us all, everyone who knew him. It's so fitting that this year's Stephen Levitz Memorial Scholarship is bestowed on the individuals who share his love for Torah, tzedakah, Shabbos, family, and community. As an intimate friend of both the Brown family and Levitz families, it is a privilege to call up Larry and Helen to accept the Stephen Levitz Memorial Award. Larry and Helen.
Thank you, Hirsch. It's a treat to be introduced by such a great lifelong friend. And as Hirsch mentioned, I'd like to welcome my mother-in-law, Mrs. Cecilia Ostro from Toronto, and my mother, Mrs. Dolores Brown from West Bloomfield. My sister and brother-in-law, Lynn and Warren Silverman, are here. Esty Brown is here. The other girls are in New York and at Camp Stone. So Tzali called me this morning and said, because of the weather, it's probably going to rain. We have to move it, inside David Ben Nachum. He was watching the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel, it's a cable television show that's on 24 hours. 24 hours of only weather. Now, we had something like that when I was a kid growing up in a park. It was called a window. But Helen and I would like to thank you for this very special honor. Our association with NCSY goes beyond the years when our kids first joined, which was somewhere around 2001 when Rachel was in 6th grade. Helen was in a Toronto chapter, and growing up at Young Israel of Oak Woods, I belonged to the Young Israel Teens, which I believe was a precursor to NCSY. Now, just in the last several years, our shul, the Young Israel of Southfield, has experienced an influx of young families, mostly from outside of Michigan. In fact, we have many members from all over the United States and Canada. Much of what I'm about to say will be directed to them. My contemporaries already know what I know about NCSY. We, as parents of 3 girls who were and are still involved in NCSY, became more and more enthused about the organization as time went on because we saw the positive effects that it had on each of them. NCSY gave them a certain amount of responsibility, a sense of community, and a greater love for Israel. Of course, these values ultimately come from the home. Although they receive reinforcement from school and shul, it is not always enough. And that's where an organization like this one comes into the picture. Usually in high school, kids get distracted due to their many obligations, ACTs, increased academic pressures, social activities. This would lead to less of a commitment to religious endeavors. But because of NCSY, our kids became more and more committed. In fact, when they got voted on to regional NCSY board, you would have thought they won the lottery. Kids grow up too fast. My father, of blessed memory, used to say, blink your eyes and they're in college. Helen and I can certainly relate to that now. We are so grateful that Rachel, Tamar, and Esty have had the opportunity to be involved as much as they have been. Our advice to those families with young children is this: get them involved, ensure your investment, and watch them evolve into young, Torah-loving community leaders. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you, Drs. Larry and Helen Brown. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hershey. I just want to, before we bench, conclude with a very brief and important and relevant Dvar Torah. We just read the story of the spies, of the Meraglim, and the obvious question is, how could the Jewish people rebel like that? They just saw the rebellion and what happened at the Golden Calf. They're living miracle lives. They have the 10 plagues and the splitting of the sea in Mount Sinai. Their very existence every day. They have fresh, cold water in the desert. Their clothes grow on them and they don't wear out. And they have this special food that was perfect. There was no belly aches and there was no waste. They didn't even need a bathroom. They lived supernatural lives. How could they possibly rebel and think that they had a problem fighting a natural war? They were not living natural lives. And furthermore, right after we read the story of the spies, We hear the story that happened about a year or two before that when they rebelled, when there was a rebellion, one individual violated the Shabbos. Why is that story mentioned immediately after the story of the spies? And why are we introduced to a new mitzvah of tzitzis immediately after the spies? So how do they make this rebellion? And what's the connection between this and the rebellion of one individual for Shabbos and that special mitzvah of tzitzis? And I believe the answer is, when it comes to our spirituality, no matter how optimal the situation, living in the desert, eating manna and protected by the clouds, and living a super miraculous life, no matter how secure you are religiously, spiritually, you are always vulnerable. You are always in jeopardy. And a Jew must never, ever feel secure about his Judaism, about his spirituality. And that's why the Torah reminds us. Remember that one Jew who rebelled against Shabbos a year or two ago? That should have been your red flag, that it's time to make some corrections. Because Shabbos is an os. Shabbos is a sign. It reminds us that God created the world in 6 days, and we have a purpose here. And when there was a weakness in Shabbos, it's time to pay attention and make some changes. And the mitzvah that we introduce is the mitzvah of tzitzis, that we need to surround ourselves with the blue thread that reminds us of the sky, and all the symbolism of the knots and the strings of the 613 mitzvahs. That's the mitzvah that we need to embrace. We need to tighten the knot of our connection to Torah. And that is how we ensure our spiritual future. Jim Collins, in the book Great by Choice, has a phrase that he calls productive paranoia. When it comes to our Judaism, we must have productive paranoia. We cannot assume that what has worked in the previous decades will continue to work for us. And every family and as a community, we must chart a path that ensures that we meet the challenge of this future generation and that we do not become statistics. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Rabbi Morris will lead us in benching. Okay.